Hey everybody, welcome to this project walkthrough by Cogent Language. Today we'll be walking through tailoring a project lifecycle. This is deciding how project deliverables will be built and then mapping these decisions onto a model of all the phases in a complete project lifecycle. Right now, this sort of work is at the heart of project management. If you're in a team that's thinking about a hybrid project, or if you're torn between adaptive and predictive approaches to development, or if you really need to start planning pretty soon, but you're not sure how many kinds of plans or how many plans you're going to need, then you're doing this kind of work. You're tailoring a project lifecycle. So this walkthrough should be especially useful if you are doing this work in a dispersed team, or if you're a member of the Project Management Institute, or if you're in an organization that uses the PMI's PMBOK or other Project Management Institute resources. If so, I'm there with you. Hello, I'm Dan Clapper. I am the Managing Director of Cogent Language. I was certified by PMI as a professional project manager back in 2007. I launched Cogent Language here in Japan at about the same time to provide project management training and consulting. Since then, many of our clients have used the PMI's PMBOK and other PMI resources to do their work. And so Cogent Language has had more than a dozen years of experience working with PMBOKs and clients, starting all the way from PMBOK 3 up until PMBOK 7, which, as a lot of you probably know, was published just this last summer. Since PMBOK 3, it's by far the one with the most extensive revisions. To start with, it reconceptualizes project management. So project management is now conceptualized as a system for values delivery. Instead of, say, a systems for deliverables delivery, the really good news is that this is the most comprehensive PMBOK ever. It's useful in more products. It's useful for more services. It's useful in more projects. It's useful for more companies, and therefore it's useful for more industries. So how does it do this? So PMBOK 7 systemically integrates agile mindset with the plan-driven or waterfall mindset. So it incorporates cutting-edge agile practices like disciplined agile with plan-driven or waterfall practices that go back to mid-20th century, like work breakdown structure, earned value analysis, critical path method. So how does it do this? Well, it uses two big new organizing ideas: project management principles and 8 performance domains. Underneath that, there are models, methods, and artifacts that are cross-referenced to the 8 performance domains, so that we don't have agile tools in one place and plan-driven tools in a different place, which is kind of like PMBOK 6 in the Agile Practice Guide. So this flexibility is part of what makes PMBOK 7 applicable in more project situations than before. Now, PMBOK 7 also includes a nice chapter on tailoring, which means customizing the advice it has to your specific context, to your specific project, to your specific people. Very nice. Very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. One of the 8 performance domains is exactly about development approaches and project life cycles. So that's very helpful for today. At about the same time PMI published the PMBOK 7, they also made available to PMI members an online database, searchable, so that you could enter a query and then get information not just from PMBOK 7, but from preceding PMBOKs, and then also from other PMI resources. There are other standards, the other kinds of publications that they have. So this is fabulous. So I thought, wow, this is great. So not surprisingly, a lot of my clients began using the PMBOK also late summer, early fall. Now, what has been a big surprise is their reaction. So the general reaction is, well, what do we do with all this stuff? What do we do with all these project management functions? And then there's performance domains and principles and models. And where did the project management processes go, and the tools and techniques and the process groups? A lot of our clients, or we had our stuff tuned to PMBOK 6, and it's gone. We don't have time to read and discuss all this stuff. We don't have time to train. We don't have time to bring in consultants. We don't have the money to spend on the training and the consultants. So how can we make this PMBOK 7 work for us? It's a nice book, but how can we make the book walk? So that is the inspiration for Cogent Language making this project walkthrough. We are going to try to answer two questions. First question, how do you tailor a project lifecycle to your specific situation? Second question, how can you make the PMBOK walk? How can you make the PMBOK work as a playbook for teams, as a practical playbook for teams, especially dispersed teams? So those are the questions we'll be trying to answer. And we will do that with a framework that Cogent Language has developed that we call a work site. And the work site is basically a way to make books walk, or to be more specific, it's a way to customize any set of insights or standards or procedures to a specific project situation. It's made especially for dispersed teams. So it's implemented by way of an infinite canvas software, and this infinite canvas platform helps to make the logic of the customization or the tailoring visible, and also helps to enables team to work synchronously or asynchronously, but also work cumulatively as a kind of a knowledge management system. So let's take a look at the framework before we launch into tailoring the project lifecycle. In this work site, there are 4 zones that are visible, and then there's also one zone that is not visible that we'll show. In the first zone of the work site, we have the context of the work. So the work, the purpose, the challenge, and then also what we're bringing the party, when do we do this, and what do we have with us, and then why do we do this? What is the rationale for doing this work? The next zone is, what are we doing? So what are the main things we're going to construct, in what order? What are the resources we can look through, especially for templates or blueprints to make the teamwork easier, that are in conformance with our principles? Those templates we're going to set out or provision into a workspace. So there's the third zone, this work area for project teams to work. The fourth zone is the actual workflow. What are we going to do? What are the steps or tasks we're going to work through in order to address the challenge that we picked? Now, you can see in the workflow, there's a thumbnail of what done looks like using the templates. And then if we drill down into these steps, we can also see that there are more detailed instructions. So as we walk through the workflow, you can see on the right side of the screen these more detailed instructions showing up. So we've got a short description of the step, thumbnail of what done looks like, and then more detailed instructions in this fifth zone, in these fourth and fifth zones. So having said that, now let's go ahead and start the walkthrough of our particular situation, which is tailoring the project lifecycle. So now we're going to be using the PMBOK as our book that we want to make walk for the purpose of tailoring a project lifecycle. So when do we do this? So we do this when we've got a turbulent environment, a VUCA environment, but also we have a visionary goal that's going to help us get through the environment and hopefully grow through the environment. We have a project that's seen as worth funding. Maybe there's a business case, there's approval of some funding for a project that's going to contribute to reaching that goal. We have the project product outlined or understood in terms of the major deliverables, the users of the deliverables, and some ideas about how the interfaces that the users are going to use. Now we need to be in planning, and we need to figure out what kinds of plans we're going to make and how many. So if we're going to use the PMBOK 7 as a source or an authority to do this, there are nice rationales for tailoring there. So there are essential project management functions providing oversight and coordination. But also we have these principles, the 2 big principles that are applicable to this challenge. We want to tailor based on context. So we want a life cycle based on our situation. We want to build quality into our processes and deliverables. Very useful also the performance domain of development approach and life cycle. So this is a key construct, a key artificial idea that the PMI has developed on the base of a lot of experience by a lot of folks. there are these 5 other constructs underneath the development approach and lifecycle: deliverable, development approach, cadence, etc. Now, these are constructs for us also in the sense of their advice or their ideas about what to build and what stages. So in this case, we want to figure out development approaches and project life cycles. So, and when we go into the next zone of work, that's what we want to do. We want to decide development approaches, and we want to tailor our project life cycle. We then have the references that help us make these decisions. So in particular, 2.3.1 in PMBOK 7. And then we have, very important, we have resources, and these resources options are resources in the sense of we're looking for templates or we're looking for blueprints that are going to help us build those 2 work products, that are going to help us work through those stages. And so what we pick in order to decide development approaches, we pick a suitability filter, and we pick a development approaches matrix using ideas about cadence, etc. To tailor the project lifecycle, we're just going to use a project lifecycle Gantt. So some of these things, the project lifecycle Gantt, for example, shows up in the PMBOK figure 2.12 and other places. Now, once we've done that, we are going to then provision our work zone 3, which is where we're going to do the work with those templates. So first we'll have the suitability filter. So this, as I mentioned, is a tool that shows up in PMBOK 7. But then also we've developed these indicators from information in the PMBOK. So if we look at deliverables and we see that the requirements are well known and easy to define, that seems to indicate a development approach that would be more towards the predictive side. On the other hand, if requirements are difficult to define or not well known, that would indicate more adaptive. So we've got this suitability filter. However, having thought through this, we realize the suitability filter is going to be talking about predictive or adaptive when we know there's a couple of other approaches, and also this suitability filter is not looking at each deliverable. So our other template that we have provisioned our workspace with is a matrix that it's going to ask us about each deliverable in the project, and then also about the cadence. How many deliveries are there for this deliverable? The same matrix will set out on the basis of having thought about cadence. Then we'll choose one of these 4 development approaches that seems useful based on the cadence and the other suitability factors that we looked at. So these 4 are the predictive and adaptive, but also incremental and iterative. So that is our second template that we've selected here. The third template to actually design the project lifecycle, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a kind of a Gantt chart of project phases. So we have a start phase, a close phase, plan, develop, test, and deploy. Now this we will tailor. We'll tailor the logic and the duration of these based on the work that we had done before. Now this work then we are going to then be guiding the work then using this workflow. So this is how to do the work in the workspace. So in terms of tailoring a project lifecycle, then we have these steps. We would try to select an initial approach using the suitability filter above. Then we would try to figure out the cadence of each deliverable. So how many deliveries are involved? Is there going to be recurrent deliveries with a time box? That kind of question. After we figure out cadence, then we're going to propose a development approach for each deliverable. So after we've done that, then we will confirm the development approach ideas with the rest of the organization. So this is tailoring the project team's ideas about development approach to the rest of the organization. Once we have then decided, once we've got tailored approaches for each deliverable, now we're going to figure out how many work streams do we need in this project. So if for example, we have not very much a single set of requirements for all the deliverables, and they can pretty much be planned and developed independently, we might have just one planning phase and one development phase and one testing phase. However, if one deliverable depended on having finished the preceding one, then we're probably going to need a couple different planning phases and a couple of different streams of work. So this is what we would do. We'd set out a skeleton of our project lifecycle. Then we're going to frame the deploy phase. When does it have to start? When can it start based on our phases? And when does it need to end? When can it end based on our phases? So we try to frame the front end and back end of the deployment phase. Then we would sequence deliverables, sequence deliveries in the deployment phase. Next step then is we would tune the predecessor phases to the sequence of deliveries in deploy. Then we would finish up the lifecycle model by looking at exit criteria for our initial phases. How do we know when we're done with the startup? How do we know when we're done planning? So this would be, we'd have some criteria and some notes on that. Once we have this, then this is what done looks like if we have a project lifecycle. Now, if you're working in an agile organization, we can think a little bit more easily about a release plan or about a project roadmap. If you're working in a plan-driven organization, then we can develop our milestone schedule from this project lifecycle, and then we can improve our project charter with this kind of a project, with this kind of a milestone schedule. So that is those are our steps. We went through that pretty quickly. So let's try to let's give an example that'll hopefully help show how to do this in the real world. So we'll get back to our presentation here. Let's imagine that you are deans and decision makers in a big university in China. So this is a top of the line, prestigious technical university in or around Beijing. And the very turbulent environment, economically, politically. You have a lot of money from the Chinese government, but you have to meet certain criteria to get the funding. You have competition from other universities for the funding, for influence, for students, for professors and researchers. Inside of your organization, then, you've found, let's imagine that your students, those applying to your place have started to tend to go to other universities because they're technically as good as yours, but they're more fun. They're more attentive to students. They're more student-centered. And so basically you have the visionary goal. You set a visionary goal of having an undergraduate experience in these technical majors that is just as engaging and challenging as a video game. So that is your goal, your BHAG. One project to help reach the goal, then, let's imagine you want to design a learning management system that is challenging and engaging to the students as a video game. So the project is called a Rainbow Bridge Learning Management System, and you want students to dare to discover, dare to care for each other, and dare to share what they've discovered with other students. So this is kind of a little bit of a social network plus a more kind of traditional LMS. But you're going to have a user interface. It's very flexible. Most students can chat and do video at the same time. They can use asynchronous university resources. This is our project product. Imagine there's 3 major deliverables. That you're going to have a technical platform that produces user interfaces like this, but also keeps the data organized and secure with reference to the rest of the university, et cetera. But also you're going to have training for the students. You're going to have a nice tutorial for the students to use this, and you're going to have training for your IT people to administer this. So under that scenario, then, let's imagine, let's go ahead and walk through what our tailoring might be like. So we've got the 3 deliverables. Let's imagine that when we first try to find an initial approach with our sliders, with our suitability filters, we find that some aspects of the project indicate adaptive, but other aspects indicate predictive. And so we come up with a hybrid idea for this Rainbow Bridge project. When we look at the deliverables, we see there's 3, as mentioned. There's 2 training deliverables, and then there's a technical platform. So the student training, we think, should be multiple deliveries, multiple modules, But with the LMS training, maybe we have a lot of assets for training technical people, and also technical people are quick learners. So we are going to have a single delivery there. With the LMS, we're also going to have multiple deliveries. So we have 2 cadences that are multiple deliveries and 1 cadence that's a single delivery. When we take the next step, then looking at the development approaches, on the tutorial for students, we think we should do this incrementally. We're going to build 1 module, have the students test it, see if they like it. They're not going to be able to use it to study, but we will test with maybe people we think are good early adopters or representatives of typical students or whatever. With a single delivery LMS training for admins, we are going to do that as a predictive or a waterfall project. Maybe the training department has a lot of assets to do that. For the LMS framework, since it's a very new sort of thing in a complex technical and complex student values, look and feel preference situation, we are going to do multiple deliveries, but we're going to do this as an iterative project. We're going to build a little bit and get it in use, build a little bit more, get it in use, that kind of idea. Now, the next step is then to confirm the project team's ideas with the organization. When we do that, let's imagine that the training department, they prefer waterfall, and so they don't want to do multiple deliveries. They want to do a single delivery. They want to do predictive. And so now we have a tailored development approach for each deliverable, tailored to our organization. Now we're ready to work with our designing a life cycle for this project. We've got a couple different things going on. There's a learning management system that we want to develop iteratively, and there's a couple kinds of training that we want to develop predictively. However, the training depends a lot on, or at least we have to know quite a bit about what the LMS is before we think about training. So for that reason, the project team sets up a skeleton of 2 different work streams. There's the LMS stream and there's the training stream. Now they're going to be thinking about the deployment phase. When can the first delivery happen? When must it happen? So this first delivery is probably a release, some release of the LMS. The initial release of the LMS, if there's no other constraints, the initial release of the LMS, the first delivery would be the start of the deploy phase. Similarly, we'd figure out the end. When does this have to be done by, or when can it be done by? Given what we need to do here. So the end of the deploy phase, assuming no other constraints, would probably be after both after the administrator and the student training was delivered. So now we've got our deploy phase framed. So when we look at then the deliveries, we would have some releases of the technical LMS, and then we would have delivery of training probably for the admins, and then delivery of the training for the students. So now we've got a sequence of deliveries in our deploy phase. Now we are going to tune the other phases to that sequence. So you can see we've done that here with the iteratively developed LMS platform. We're going to have quite a bit of overlap between planning, development, and testing. But with the predictively developed training, it has to lag the development, but then also there's not going to be much overlap between those phases. To finish off the life cycle here, we would then look at our criteria for exiting the startup phase, which would probably be having a life cycle something like this as one of the criteria. But then also, how do we know when we're ready to start developing the LMS? How do we know when we're ready to start when we're finished planning the training and ready to start planning? So this then would be, again, the basis for either roadmaps or release plans or a project charter, depending on how the organization, how the university wanted to work with this project. So this then is how we would tailor a project lifecycle, and it's also gives some ideas about how to make the PMBOK walk. So if we go back to our work site for this, the workflow that we've just worked through, this set of steps, is our idea about, or our advice about how to tailor a project lifecycle. Look at, use a suitability filter to try to get an initial approach, but then tailor the approach to each deliverable based on cadence and based on based on cadence and based on the constraints of your organization or the requirements of the organization. Once we have that, then we are going to develop our project life cycle based on the number of work streams we need and the sequence of deliveries in the deploy phase largely. If we then, the second question, how then do we make the PMBOK walk? Well, we would be looking exactly at not just the PMBOK, but any advice, any standards, any internal mission, vision, value statements, etc., that we would set out in our context. These are the rationales. These are the things that are our values. These are the things that are important for us. This is what we would bring to the party. This is what we have. This is why we're facing this challenge, where we're facing the challenge. But then in terms of the context, what we want to figure out then is what are the work products that we are going to produce in what sequence in order to face the challenge. So then we move to the next zone of work, which is identifying the work products and their sequence, and then looking through resources that are going to help us set out templates that are visual, that are blueprints for a team to work through. Then we'll provision a workspace with those blueprints, whatever they are, and then we will design steps to work through the work with some thumbnails that show what done looks like on the template for each step. So basically, this is our this would be Cogent Language's recommendation about how to make any book walk in for your team. Specifically with a PMBOK, how can we make a PMBOK? How can you make the PMBOK into a playbook for teams so that they can actually enhance the work that they're doing in the projects they have? Okay, that is all for today. I'm sure that you have some great suggestions on this and some great questions and probably some great complaints. Don't be shy. Put them down here in the comments section. If you are tailoring a project lifecycle, or if you're curious about how to make the PMBOK walk, then you might want to visit the work site that we did this walkthrough on, and that URL is down below also. And finally, if you found this walkthrough useful and you would like to see some more, or you'd like to know when the next ones come out, go ahead and don't be shy. Subscribe, hit the subscribe button, and we will see you then next time. Thanks very much. Hope this is helpful. See you later.